You watched someone leave a conversation feeling smaller than when they entered. You weren't sure what happened. The words were fine. The tone was reasonable. Nothing you could point to. Just a residue, a faint recalibration of your own position relative to theirs. You didn't imagine it. Not because you're paranoid, not because you're oversensitive, not because you misread the room. You registered something real. You just didn't have the architecture to name it. This video won't give you a shield. It won't give you a script for protecting yourself. It will give you something more unsettling, a precise description of the mechanism operating on you before you know a conversation has started. The person doing it isn't improvising. They're running a system. Most people think manipulation is a moment, a lie. A manipulation is what you catch. A manipulation is visible. The ask disguised as concern, the guilt trip with a smile, the obvious flattery before a request. That's not what we're examining here. What operates below that level doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like curiosity. It looks like warmth. It looks like the rare gift of someone who actually pays attention. The mechanism doesn't trigger your defenses. It disables them. That's the distinction. Social influence, broadly understood, is the normal traffic of human interaction. Persuasion, charm, framing. These are ambient. Everyone uses them most of the time without awareness. What we're describing is a different category of operation entirely, not influence. Engineering. The person running this system isn't trying to convince you of something. They're redesigning the ground you stand on while you're standing on it. In the late 1950s, a researcher at Yale named Stanley Milgram began studying something he initially called the problem of obedience. The formal experiments came later. What preceded them was a quieter observation that ordinary people in ordinary social situations consistently underestimated the degree to which the framing of an interaction determined their behavior within it. The person who establishes the frame of a conversation, who defines what kind of exchange it is before a single meaningful word is exchanged, holds a structural advantage that persists through the entire interaction regardless of content. Milgram called this the definition of the situation. Whoever defines it first defines it completely. The data attached to that finding, the part that recontextualizes everything, gets addressed later. The brain has a threat detection system that runs approximately 200 milliseconds ahead of conscious processing. The amygdala, threat evaluation structure, processes social cues faster than the prefrontal cortex can form a judgment about them. This is not a flaw, it's engineering. The system evolved to detect predators before the visual cortex finished rendering the image. The person running a manipulation system knows, even if they've never used this language, that the window between your threat detection and your conscious reasoning is where their leverage lives. They don't try to convince your reasoning. They speak to the amygdala first. They calibrate to it. They route around the part of your brain that would ask the right questions. The pattern isn't a character attack. It's a timing exploit. Your reasoning arrives at the conversation 3 steps after your nervous system has already been configured. Think back to the last time someone made you feel immediately at ease, before they'd earned it. Not comfort built over time, not trust developed through repeated reliability. Something faster, a warmth that felt specific to you, an attention that felt rare. Where were you? How long did it take for your guard, whatever guard you carry, to stop being a guard? What did you say in that relaxed state that you wouldn't have said otherwise? The early environment that shaped your nervous system also shaped your response to warmth. Attuned attention is not a neutral signal. For most people, it bypasses evaluation entirely. It reads as safety. It reads as recognition. The person who can produce the feeling of being recognized without actually recognizing you has found the fastest route to your trust. The question is what they do once they arrive there. Here's the difficult data. The behaviors that dismantle your defenses, the mirroring, the attuned attention, the careful calibration to what you respond to, are not invented by people with manipulative intent. They are, in origin, the behaviors of secure attachment, the behaviors of someone who actually sees you. The mechanism that delivers safety and the mechanism that delivers exploitation are neurobiologically identical in their first phase. Your nervous system cannot distinguish between them. That isn't a failure of your intuition. It's the architecture. The signal is the same signal. The system that helped your ancestors identify trustworthy allies uses the same detection pathway as the system that should flag skilled manipulators. Knowing this doesn't update the system. That's where the real difficulty begins. The tools most people use to protect themselves are calibrated to catch the wrong version of this. The Milgram data that rarely gets discussed outside specialist literature is this. It wasn't the authority symbol that sustained compliance. It was the social frame established in the first 30 seconds of the interaction. Participants who were given a different conversational entry point, a different definition of the situation before any authority cues were introduced, showed dramatically different behavioral trajectories throughout the entire experiment, independent of the pressure applied later. The frame established before the meaningful content began was more predictive of behavior than anything that followed. The implication for what we're describing here runs deeper than most popular discussions of manipulation acknowledge. Pre-announcement. What follows is the part that dismantles the most common protective belief about this. The frame isn't set by what someone says. It's set by the kind of person they present themselves, as in the first exchange. Once that presentation is accepted, even partially, even unconsciously, it functions as a perceptual filter for everything that comes after. Contradictory evidence doesn't update it. The frame processes that evidence as an exception. The advice is consistent. Watch for red flags. Trust your gut. Look for inconsistencies. Notice what doesn't add up. All of this fails for a structural reason. Red flags are visible only after the frame has been accepted. Your gut is the nervous system that has already been configured by the initial warmth signal. Inconsistencies are processed through a filter that was installed before you had information. The conventional advice assumes a linear sequence: exposure to behavior, then evaluation of behavior, then decision. The actual sequence: frame installation, then evaluation through the installed frame, then behavior observed through that frame. It's not that your gut is wrong, it's that your gut is reporting on the frame, not on the person. The substitute question isn't, do I feel safe with this person? It's, who established the conditions under which I'm currently evaluating safety? Accountability partnerships and behavioral tracking have no entry point here. The system being described operates before behavior patterns are available to observe. It happens in the first 3 minutes. You're talking. Something about the conversation feels unusually easy. There's a small disclosure you make. Something mild. Something you wouldn't categorize as significant. A preference. A frustration. A passing reference to something that matters to you. They receive it precisely. Not just acknowledgement. Precise reception. They reflect something back that fits so well it feels like recognition. The feeling that arrives isn't excitement. It's more subtle. It's the quiet lowering of the ambient cost of the interaction. Something released. The frame was just installed, not with a statement, with a calibration, with the feeling of being met, which your nervous system cannot distinguish from actually being met. What follows is not new information, it's navigation through a terrain that was just quietly mapped. The conversation wasn't started, it was opened. What that installation costs you isn't visible in the moment. It accumulates in a different register. Over time, the territory in which you allow yourself to be fully present contracts. Not dramatically, incrementally. There are conversations you stopped having, not because they were forbidden, because they stopped feeling available. Rooms you no longer stand fully inside. A version of yourself that was louder or more direct or more demanding, that got quieter. Not because you decided to quiet it, because the calibration of enough interactions made that version expensive to maintain. The contraction is the cost, slow enough to be invisible, large enough, over time, to have restructured what you consider normal. Here's the finding that almost never surfaces in the popular conversation about manipulation. Repeated exposure to skilled framing doesn't just affect individual interactions. It recalibrates the baseline from which all subsequent social evaluation occurs. The nervous system adapts to the frame as default. What was initially a specific manipulation of a specific interaction becomes the generalized lens. The path out of that, not transformation, not a technique, not a workshop, is a process of baseline recalibration that is slow, non-linear, and incompatible with the speed at which popular psychological advice imagines change occurring. Understanding the mechanism doesn't turn it off. That was never the offer. Understanding the mechanism is the beginning of noticing when you're inside one. That's a different thing entirely, and a smaller thing than most people want it to be. You felt it before you had words for it. The interaction that left you reconfigured. The conversation that ended differently than it began. Now you have a different kind of map, not a way out, a way of reading the terrain while you're standing in it. The question isn't whether the mechanism is running. The question is whether you can see the frame from inside it, and what you do with that visibility. That's yours to answer. The person who builds these frames, the one who installs a definition of the situation before you know a situation has been defined, tends to share a specific psychological architecture, a cluster of traits that makes the mechanism not just possible but necessary. The next video names that architecture. It identifies what you can detect in the first 5 minutes of an interaction before the frame has fully closed around you. Watch it now.